Today's game is Vladimir Kramnik, former world champion, number 3 in the world with the white pieces, and Hikaru Nakamura, number 8 in the world, former U.S. champion, with the black pieces. Hi folks, John Cordisco back again with another great chess video for you. This was played today on Friday, June 14th, 2013. It's round 2 of the 8th annual Tom Memorial being played in Russia right now between Vladimir Kramnik, former world champion, rated number 3 in the world, and my buddy from the United States, Hikaru Nakamura, who's now rated number 8 in the world. He has black. Carl's about 2770 and change in rating, and Kramnik is a little bit over 2800. They're elite players, world elite players. It's going to be a King's Indian, so let's get to it. Kramnik has white, Nakamura has black. I'm just going to breeze through the opening here a little bit. It's pretty much standard stuff. G3. No point really going in any in-depth opening theory. I mean, this isn't really about the opening, it's about the game itself. Castle, E5, B3, Rook D8, E4, C6. Also, I have right now my Fritz 13 computer is on off screen. You can't see it. And right now, oddly enough, for the King's Indian, I'm surprised. It's a tiny advantage, almost even for white. Bishop E3, pawn takes, knight takes, knight C5, F3. Important move here. You need to reinforce your center pawn, which is the E4 pawn. Queen E7, Rook to E1, A5, Queen to C2, and Bishop to E6. Interesting might have been Knight F to D7. It would have hemmed in the bishop, but the knight being here, hopping over here maybe, not sure what he would do with it. After Bishop to E6, Rook A to D1, just getting your rooks connected and centralized there. In fact, this is white's semi-open file. A4, B4, knight C, D7, knight takes E6. Now, right now it shows about a 1.1 point advantage, 1.25 point advantage for white. Interesting, instead of knight takes E6, would have been knight takes A4, bishop takes C4, A3. A bit of an interesting follow-up, and then D5. That would have been a little bit in black's favor, but it's still pretty interesting. Knight takes C6, queen takes C6, knight takes A4, knight E5, C5, just pressing forward, queen C4. Now I'll tell you, it's funny, before I go queen to C4, I'm just a 1580 rated player, U.S. Chess Federation rating. And for some reason, guys like us, or most people that watch these videos, whenever a pawn is there to be captured, we always stare and look at what will happen after we capture and this and that. A lot of these guys, they like to leave the tension on the board. And you see that a lot, where us guys, we just capture and move on. That's probably why they're playing in the Tom Memorial and we're not. C4. Interesting might have been D takes, F4 hitting the knight, C takes, F takes, knight to G4. After queen to C3, queen to B3, D takes, knight to B6. Interesting might have been instead of knight to B6, F4. It would have went knight to G4, F takes, knight takes, rook takes, queen takes b4. Interesting. Which would have gave white an almost 2-point advantage. After white's 21st move, knight to b6, queen takes b3, a takes, rook a to d8, b takes c. Interesting might have been if bishop takes, knight to d3, rook to f1, bishop to f8, bishop takes, king takes, with a small advantage for white, about a quarter of a pawn. Even though he's a pawn up, he's not a pawn up in score, so that would be probably black's best interest. So that's probably why I took with the b pawn. So white's move b takes c5 and move 23 was the correct move. Knight f to d7 for Caro. Now right now it's showing almost a 1.5 advantage for white. Knight to a4, knight to f8. We're going to see some maneuvering now. Rook to d6. I'll tell you the truth. We got all minor pieces on the board and both sets of rooks. The queens are off. But this is a complicated position. There's a lot that can go wrong and right depending on how you go. So the rook to d6. Interesting move would have been king to f1, rook takes, f5. Might have been worth looking at. Knight d6 for Caro, rook e to d1, rook to a8, h3. That helps because eventually he'll want to move this pawn up, and it guards the square here once that f pawn moves. Knight to c4. Now we all know he's not getting a piece for free, because if he takes here, he takes here. And that's what happened. Unfortunately, black's b pawn is kind of backwards. That's tough. That makes it hard. So now it's a little bit harder too for white to advance his extra pawn on the king side, because there's so many pieces with the king. If you want an extra pawn, have it on the opposite side of the board. It's a lot more powerful. Rook to d7, getting right into black's position. Now, just to give you an idea, after rook to d7, the computer shows it as 0.00. That's dead drawn. Just go back 2 moves to knight to e6, and it's over a pawn advantage for white. After we go rook to d7, even though white is up a pawn, it's still even. So that's not good news for white, which is very unlike Kramnik. Rook to b4 to guard the pawn. f4, starting to get his center pawns right in. Bishop to f8. Now I didn't do that, the computer did. I guess just trying to illustrate that black is trying to concentrate on white's c5 pawn. Pretty funny. King to h2. Bishop takes. Bishop to c1. Rook to a8. f5. Now it's starting to slowly creep up in black's favor. It's almost 3/4 of a pawn advantage now for black. It's slowly starting to turn. These small inaccuracies are starting to catch up with Kramnik. Knight to f8. Of course, he has to move the rook. Rook takes c4. Bishop to h6. Now you're going to see something interesting now, because you can see the doubled rooks coming down here, pinning white's knight. And of course, the king can't move here because of the dark squared bishop. So that's pretty annoying if you want to know the truth of it. Bishop d7, just to guard the d8 square temporarily for now, so that can't happen. Rook on 1 to d2, b5, rook to f3. Interesting, it might have been bishop to f3. Then it would have went b4, rook to f2, bishop to c3. That, I think, would have been a little bit better for black. At least it would have been better if I was black, because now this square is being covered. He can move his bishop back, and then he retakes with the king. Or the white's bishop moves. White's knight is not in a bad spot. b4 for black. Now it's starting to slowly creep up. I don't think as good might have been rook takes e4, f takes, knight takes, rook to f5. I think that's a little bit weaker for black. After b4, e5. Just a thought though, instead of e5, maybe doubling his rooks back up and going bishop f6. At least it's more powerful for white. Those double rooks look pretty powerful there. After e5, g takes. Now, just a couple of moves before this is when I came into the game, and I was really surprised when Hikaru took. I don't know why he took, isolating all his pawns, but he decided that was the best decision. Rook takes, knight to g6, get his knight off the back rank. Rook d to f2. Bishop f8. He's finally going to get rid of that dark squared bishop, and the bishop backs off. Interesting instead might have been bishop takes, rook takes, h4. And of course the rook has to take because of the doubled up rooks on the f file. He would have lost the f pawn. After move 41 for white, bishop for g5, he backs off the bishop. White's got about a 2¼ point lead now. Or excuse me, black has a 2¼ point lead. He's a pawn up, but he's got a pretty good position here. Now let's just recap here. We've got the minor pieces are the same, but white does have the bishop pair, which is pretty powerful stuff. But Hikaru's got, excuse me, these connected pass pawns. And that's a big problem for white. Granted, white has an extra pawn on the king side, but a little harder to get the pawn through. Now, granted, white does have the bishop pair, and I think that's the only thing that's keeping him in the game, to be honest with you. b3, here comes the pawn. You know, I've always said it's funny. If you're on the receiving end of a pawn coming down, and he's on your 6th or 7th rank, and you're playing in a game, it's amazing how big the pawn looks. Physically, he's no bigger, but for some reason in your mind, he just looks way bigger. Rook takes f7. Rook to b8, guarding his passed pawn, because that's now his prized possession. Bishop to f4. Rook to c3. e6. Interesting might have been rook on 7 to f3. Rook takes. Bishop checks. King moves and then retakes. I don't know what good that would have done. But it is an interesting setup. After e6, b2. f6. He can't stop the pawn, so he doesn't try. Queen, bishop takes, queen to b3, rook on f to f3. Now, I remember watching the game right here, and it's over a 5-point advantage for Hikaru, which is a full rook. It's resignable. But if Kramnik has white resigned here, no one would blame him. But these guys are so competitive, they can't. Now, this is where I think Hikaru might have, at least when I saw it, I was so upset. He moved bishop to c5. Now, his advantage was over 5 points. Once he moves bishop to c5, almost half of his advantage is gone. And I remember watching the game. I was watching it both on Play Chess and ICC both. You don't get any analysis on Play Chess because I'm not a premium member. But on ICC you do. And I remember, why didn't he just take the pawn? Queen takes e6. Keeps his advantage, and he gets rid of that pesky e-pawn. And it would have went rook to e3, queen to d5, rook to d3. With over a 5-point advantage, it's even higher than it was before. But that didn't happen. So now I'm thinking, oh boy. You know, sometimes it's funny. And I've done this, And I think this is more of a human trait than it is a great chess player trait. That you know you're ahead. You know you're way ahead. So somehow you get it in your mind, any quote-unquote normal move has to be winning as I'm so far ahead. And that's what I think would happen to Carl. He wasn't in time trouble, I know. In fact, Kramnik was. We're on move 47, but up to the 40th move, Kramnik was having some time trouble. Now, Carl didn't have any time pressure. I think he got a little anxious. Sometimes he says he sees things that aren't there. He sees phantoms. We all do when we play, especially when we're in the zone and we're really trying hard. After bishop to c5 for Carl, rook to b2. Now granted, black is still up by over 3 points. Queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes, bishop to g2. It's still 3¼ point advantage. But basically now, instead of being up what he was, he's up a knight for a pawn. Basically this pawn for this knight. And it's funny how the computer has these weird sayings on here. It says king to h1 is an alternative, doesn't get the cat out of the tree, because after knight to e5, rook to f4, g7. After bishop to g2, bishop to e7, h4, rook to e2, rook to c3, c5, king to h3. I don't think king to g1 would have helped much. After king to g7, it's pretty much set. After king to h3, king to g7, bishop to d5, knight to e5, g4. I don't think, when you're looking at bishop to b3, was much better. Because after rook to d2, h5, rook to d4, it's pretty much sealed up for black. I will say this though, when Nakamura had that inaccurate move a few moves ago that dropped a lot of his advantage, I think he realized after he made it, it was a huge error. Maybe not a blunder, but a huge inaccuracy. And what happens sometimes is, when you see that, you get upset. And we all know, watched Nakamura play a million times, a lot of us. He gets very emotional in the game. You can see if he's happy or not very quickly. He's kind of like me, you know. He might not be as bad as Kasparov, but you can tell pretty much if Carl's disgusted or not. And he kept his composure together. Now, we're playing against Vladimir Kramnik now. I want you to picture this. I don't care if you're an elite player like Hikaru is. You're playing the ex-world champion. The guy that tied in the last candidates tournament and lost on tie breaks to Carlsen. Kramnik is an incredibly good player. And you have him. And you know you have him. And then you make a miscue like bishop to c5. And you realize it. And get your act together and keep it together. That's not that easy. And I'll give Carl credit for that. I really will. A little kudos for him. After 55 g4, knight to g6, rook to f3. I don't think g3 would have helped. When rook to bishop b7, he still would have been losing. After rook to f3, bishop to d6, rook to f7 check. And now, as you can see, we got the bishop coming, we've got the rook here, we've got the knight here. Things are starting to cave in on Vladimir. King to h8, g5, rook to h2 check. King only move, rook takes h4. And white Vladimir Kramnik resigned. After rook takes h4, king to f3, knight to e5 check, king, and then rook. And it's a disaster. A real disaster. Congratulations to Akaro. I know this win is probably important to him after yesterday's loss. I remember a couple of years ago he was right in the hunt for first place. I forget who he was playing. It might have been a Ronin, I'm not sure. In the Tao Memorial a couple of years ago, he was winning the game and he made a huge miscue. And he was so disgusted. I've seen the video and he was just beside himself. And he pulled this one off, and I'm happy for him. He played a hell of a game with that kind of pressure. These guys are world-class players. Anyway, folks, I hope you enjoyed the video. I just want you all to remember, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. And we're going to try to get some more videos from the Tao Memorial 2013. And this is John Cordisco signing off. And I hope everyone comments. And please, everyone, please subscribe. Thank you. Bye-bye, folks.
Come ride the little train that is rolling down the tracks to the junction. Forget about your cares, it is time to relax at the junction. Lots of curves, you bet, and even more when you get to the junction.
Petticoat Junction.
There's a little hotel called the Shady Rest at the junction.
Petticoat Junction.
It is run by Kate, come and be her guest at the junction.
Petticoat Junction.
And that's Uncle Joe, he's a moving kind of slow at the junction. Petticoat Junction.